Hello and welcome to those of you joining us here live or who are able to enjoy this through a recording at a later date. You've joined the Embed the Patient Voice Throughout Your Clinical Trials webinar, and my name is Craig Lipset. I'll be serving as your moderator for today. I'd like to begin just by thanking our friends over at Reuters Events Pharma for bringing us together. This is going to be a fabulous and quick moving hour because we have some tremendous voices with significant experience in different areas around this topic. We're also looking forward to questions from you, our audience today. And so feel free to take advantage of the Q&A button that you'll see on your Zoom window. Many of you have already submitted questions at registration, and we've been sure to incorporate those in our conversation as well. If you feel so inclined and you're here with us live and would like to introduce yourself, feel free to use the chat and add your name and where you're connecting from and maybe what the weather looks like where you are in your corner of the world. I'm here in New Jersey today where it's bright and sunny, which is a great way to get this conversation going today. So remember, take advantage of the Q&A button for your questions during the meeting. And if you're so inclined, use the chat just to introduce yourself by name and where you are in the world and maybe what it looks like outside your window today. Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation for a number of reasons. And some of those reasons I think were even called out by some of you in the Q&As that you provided at your registration. There's so much conversation that we've had and continue to have about the importance, the impact, the role of including patient voice in clinical trials. And so with this conversation, I'm really looking forward to talking to some experts and getting a better sense of our baseline. Where are we today? What's working? What's sort of becoming the norm? Where are our gaps and aspirations for continued progress? Sort of doing a bit of a pulse check, but also making sure we're looking ahead. What can we do better? And where do we think the field is going, whether through our own initiatives or through the changes around us, through technology and access to data that's flourishing? Well, to get our conversation going, this is a great time to get to meet some of our panelists today. Sasha, you are in the top left on my screen, so a great way to get things started. Would you mind introducing yourself for the audience?
Sure. Thanks so much, Craig. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sasha Tyndale. I also am located in New Jersey, so remotely located in New Jersey. So I see that nice, pretty sun. I am representing AbbVie. I've been at AbbVie for going on 10 years with a focus on clinical operations the entire time. But really the role that I hold right now has been the most exciting for me. I have the opportunity of overseeing our diversity and patient inclusion team, which really focuses on not only how do we ensure that those patients that are in our clinical trials are representative of those who are expected to take our treatment, but also really bringing in that patient insight voice as we move forward through the research process. So really excited for the conversation today and looking forward to really getting into the topic with Meg and Shauna. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sasha. Meg, it would be great to get to meet you. Please come on in and introduce yourself for the audience.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. I see people are coming in from all over the world. I am just so honored to be here with you to talk about patient inclusion. And I work in Genentech's Chief Diversity Office in Patient Inclusion and Health Equity. And I have the honor of full-time working to advance inclusive research at the enterprise level and working with partners throughout the business like Sasha and ops to understand how to improve representation. And we believe that D&I is everybody's business at Genentech, and all of our officers have actions in our D&I pillars, which is foster belonging for people, advancing inclusive research and health equity for our patients, and transform society for our communities. And one of the things that I'll lean into a lot, Craig, when we're giving answers is my work with the Advancing Inclusive Research Site Alliance. We're working with sites across the US and actually have site alliances in other parts of the world where they're teaching us how to build trust with communities. They're already enrolling underrepresented patient populations better than anybody else in the country. And they're helping us co-create materials like more inclusive protocols and more inclusive entry criteria and consent simplification and ensuring patient navigations in our budget. So I'm happy to talk about some of that. And they also have lended their patients and patients who give us representative patients, our Black and Latino patients, our white and mixed race patients are giving us feedback to make sure we have cultural humility built in the materials that we're bringing into research. So happy to talk about more of that later on. And thanks for having me today, Craig.
Thanks so much for being here, Meg. And Shauna, welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shauna Anderson, and I'm coming to you from Sanofi. I am currently in the clinical development group, specifically for rare blood disorders. So I'm in the rare and rare blood disorders group at Sanofi. And I will say that our main goal is to run clinical trials so that we can test medicines to see if they can improve human lives. And specifically in rare and rare blood disorders, for us, our patients are coming from communities where many times their diseases have not even been recognized. They may not have been diagnosed for many times. And so these are often some of the most underrepresented individuals, irregardless of their race or gender or sexual type, simply because their diseases are so rare. And so it is very important that we incorporate the voices of the patients in our studies, because their challenges are often incredibly burdensome. And so we need to make sure that our trials are possible and that we can collect the data that we need so that we can introduce more treatments for these patients who are, in many cases, have been forgotten.
Thank you so much, Shauna. And thank you as well to all of you in the audience saying hello. We have, as Meg mentioned, folks joining us here from around the world. It's fun to see who's here in the different corners of the US, the early birds out on the West Coast, and those like me in the East, and everyone in between, but also throughout Europe, the Middle East. I've seen some folks from Lebanon and Tehran joining us. So welcome to you all. To get things started, you know, this isn't new, right? We've been talking about patient voice now for a number of years, and many of us on this call have been aspiring to drive change and adoption in this area for some time. Sasha, I'm wondering if you could help get us started by just helping us to baseline. What do you consider good, state of the art? What's kind of the baseline for where a life sciences company today should be operating in terms of including patient voice and development?
Thanks for that, Craig. I think that baseline, and the good thing is I think that we're getting there, right? I think baseline, every life science company, every drug developer really should be making it a standard practice and part of just the way that they work to bring in the patient perspective within not only clinical trial design and really thinking about operationalizing a clinical trial, but just the drug development process as a whole. So to me, I think that just at the bare minimum, that's something that all companies should be doing. And I love how Meg typically will refer to this as a non-competitive space, because I think that this is something that, as drug developers, as pharmaceutical companies, that we can really partner together to ensure that we're all moving forward with being as customer-centric as possible. I think in terms of just what's new, what's up and coming. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation around AI and leveraging AI as much as possible to support holistic activities in the drug development process. A lot of the times we're collecting feedback from patients, it's unstructured data, right? So how can we actually make sure that we're always learning, that we're not necessarily spinning our wheels collecting the same information, but we're adding to and we're driving our learning journey. And I think that AI can support with that to not only catalog the insights that we're collecting, but to share it broadly within the organization as well. So to me, those are some of the things that are cutting edge, that are new. that I'm really excited about. And Abby's definitely, we're leaning into that to really make sure that we understand how we can leverage the new technology to just make us better for our patients.
Well, I'm definitely going to come back to this around treating these patient insights as data and the role for AI and maybe even other real world data there. It's on my parking lot, so I'm going to make sure we get back to there. Meg, when you're thinking about baseline today, what does good look like from an organizational or enterprise perspective? What does good look like in terms of driving that culture or other enterprise change that's needed?
Yeah, I often think our biggest barrier to change is organizational behavior change. And I think it's really important to embed partners who are educating teams in the business, like Sasha is, and I believe Shauna. So we have, I'll give you an idea of the structure. So our patient inclusion and health equity team reports directly to the CEO. So we have C-suite visibility. So if you have an organization and you can pull that D&I from the layers down in HR up to the C-suite, you can make sure you've got leaders that are embracing and pushing the boundaries to do better in representation. That includes patient insights and representative patients. And then we have a health equity population science group who's embedded in our pharma business, who's helping teams develop diversity action plans. We have D&I procurement dedicated folks who are looking at these novel AI vendors. I'm with you, Sasha. AI, I think there are dangers from a patient perspective and how we might search the internet and might get misinformed. And I think there are incredible ways that we're going to learn with lab in the loop, finding new targets, leveraging AI and forecasting who's going to be better on a standard of care drug versus our investigational product. We can do that right now mid-study. So I see a lot of change coming. But I think it's really important, Craig, for organizational behavior change, you embed authority at the leadership level. So all of our officers signing those officer action plans, and then you provide resources and money and a little bit, take a risk, right? This is innovation. You need to do something different. So giving people permission to fail. And I was provided this book I'll recommend to everybody called Immunity to Change. It's really interesting. It's like, I want to run another day a week. I've wanted to run another day a week for 20 years. And all these things get in my way. So it's called Immunity to Change. And even if you want to change, even if you want to adopt something new, even if you're completely there in every way from an ethical, a clinical, and a business perspective, still people don't change. And it's because of competing priorities. So I think we're going to need to look a hard look at our competing priorities, whether that's fast to launch in oncology or whether that's resource and cost savings. We're going to have to really look at that to fully embrace and go further in improving representation. But patient insights, they're my heroes. They help people stop and think and do things differently. And I can talk about that later.
One thing I love about this panel is, I don't know if our audience noted this, all of our panelists are at different places of the organization. And Shauna, you're leading around a specific asset, a specific therapeutic area program. And so in many ways, you're almost like the voice of the study team in this conversation. When we're talking about enterprise culture and trying to drive change, how do we make sure this isn't just a check the box exercise when it works its way to the individual study teams?
Yeah, and I think that that's really important. I will say that there are many of these sort of initiatives that, when it comes to the day-to-day running of a clinical program and a clinical study, unfortunately do become, okay, we just have to make sure we get these done. But I think that when it comes to the patient voice, that's not something that is true, nor is it something that we allow to be true, because quite honestly, our trials will fail if we do not incorporate what the patients want and what they need into our studies. We will not be able to enroll patients. We will not be able to retain them. And in the end, the data quality will not be good. And our goals will fail because our patients, if they do not feel heard, if they don't feel like the trial is actually addressing the issues that matter to them, then it's not going to be something that is going to be representative, and it's not going to be giving us the data that we need. And so I can speak definitely for Sanofi. We definitely have completely embedded the patient voice when it comes to the design of a clinical study, as well as a program. So every time I write a protocol, there is a pause. There is an abbreviated protocol, and then there is a deliberate pause. And during that pause, we have pressure testing. And that pressure testing comes from many different avenues. It comes from, from a budget perspective, from doing advisory boards with our key opinion leaders to make sure that the science is there. But we also have a pressure test where we incorporate patient panels. And so we partner with our advocacy our advocacy group internally, and they help us to work with external advocacy groups to create a panel. And so it depends if it's going to be a pediatric study, it's going to be a panel of caregivers. If it's going to be an adult study, then we are actually including patients who have this disease, and we try to vary it when it comes to the background of these patients as well, so that we can really try to understand what they need. And at this point, or one of the people who are running the study will be presenting to this patient panel. And we show them our inclusion, our exclusion criteria. We talk a little bit about the mechanism of action of the drug. We tell them look at the schedule of assessments and the number of visits that we're asking for, the number of, injections or pills that they will need to take. We'll talk about basically all of the different assessments, because, when you're talking about taking blood from somebody, if depending on how frequently you're doing that, that is a burden. We're also talking about, what can we do to ease that? Can we provide transportation? Can we help with home health aides? Can we do more remote activities? And we listen to the patients to see how we can design a study, or their caregivers. How can we design a study that will allow us to help them to work with us best? This is an imposition. Think about your normal lives. You have your families, your job, your children, your pets, all these things that have to be incorporated within your day. And now on top of that, we're asking these individuals to incorporate documentation. We're asking them to incorporate, additional healthcare visits when they may have settled into a nice, we may be asking them to travel very long distances to a clinical site that might be the closest site to them. So we have to incorporate all of these things, not just the practical, but also, how long are they going to be sitting there? How many of these assessments can we have them do beforehand online? Or how can we do things, that will increase their ability to really engage in this process? And so I think that's something that has to be part of it. And all of this is put on the table in front of the patient panel. And they will tell us, well, I think that this particular patient, PRO or patient reported outcome, this particular questionnaire, it's too long. It's going to take me like an hour sitting there. And I have, my 2 kids that I have to somehow entertain while I try to do that. Is there some way that you can put this on a tablet? Or they'll tell me, hey, you really haven't considered mental health and the impact of this chronic disease, or you haven't considered pain. You get a lot of feedback. And after that pause, we go back, we take this feedback from all of these different sources, and we change the protocol. That protocol is not final. We change it, and it only becomes final when we feel that we have truly incorporated that voice. And it is not just a team that gets this. Our protocol review committee gets these transcripts from these panels. So they are actually checking to make sure that we have truly, listened, and we have incorporated the feedback that we've gotten, so that we can make sure that we are incorporating the patient voice at the very beginning of this process.
It's tremendous. And so far, I've already learned so much with this group, and we're already hearing how organizations can normalize these practices, bake them into existing processes and existing workflows, and some of the tactics and strategies, both around supporting organizational change, but also the types of tools and ways to engage here. Meg, would you like to add to this, or maybe even bring in some additional experience?
Yeah, just quickly, but we all would nod to this, right? Early feedback, integrating patients wherever you are. I would say even putting a patient on steering committees along with your sites. But Sean, I want to just double score that. And for the folks in the audience that might not have extensive patient advocacy groups, because we all work with patient advocacy groups, there are ways to do this that are not expensive. You can bring in a representative patient and a coordinator, do a patient journey and a coordinator journey for an hour, have your protocol authors listening, really listening, not jumping to solutions, and then walking them through literally on a whiteboard the scheduled assessments. And patients will tell you what's going to be difficult. And there's something about the protocol authors seeing it directly that helps them pause. I like what you said, Shauna, pause and think, how am I going to do this differently? I have seen secondary endpoints added. I've seen visits dropped after 6 months when they know the PK of the individual. I have seen major changes when protocol authors and everybody from PK pharmacists to your drug safety, ClinSci, or operations folks. So there are so many right ways to do this if you implement Stanford design thinking. And then another thing a lot of companies are doing is a studio, an innovation lab. So we have about 190 patients in a patient co-creation council, and they come in and give us patient insights on many things from education to protocol design, but also on testing. So when you're doing an intraocular device or a subcutaneous injection, we're getting their direct feedback on their concerns, how it manages, how it handles, and instructions. So there are just so many right ways. I think just making sure you get it before you finalize the protocol is key.
And I love this theme of the range of places where those patient insights are able to make an impact, whether it's around the study design, the visit schedule, the procedures, the instruments, the technology, the endpoints involved. And Sasha, as we're thinking about all these different ways that we can engage patients, and some of which can be very scalable, fitting different organizations' timelines and budgets. One question that comes up a lot for me is, how do we make sure we have representative voices being heard, not just the loudest voice in the room? And especially today, where so many are increasingly thoughtful of the different subpopulations that they want to see represented, how many voices does a team need to hear in order to have confidence that they are getting representative input?
Yeah, I have to say I'm sitting here smiling and nodding to first of all, I just have to honor everything that Meg and Shauna said, and again underscore that, happy to hear that we're all in the same place in terms of where our organizations are and are going in terms of really walking the walk in terms of making sure that we're pulling in those patient perspectives. At the end of the day, the patients are who is driving innovation for our organizations, right? I'm hearing all of the things that we're talking about in terms of we're changing visit schedules, we're changing instruments, et cetera. And really, that's a reaction to what we're hearing from the patient. So I wanted to say that at the end of the day, really innovation is being driven from the patient perspective in terms of making sure that they're as representative as possible, and how do we make sure that we're not indexing to the loudest voice in the room. I think that this is where, again, there's a lot of partnership across the organizations to make sure that we're really clear on, what's the right mix of patient, and even, I think, Meg, you would even mentioned city coordinators, and site personnel and the care partners, because it's not just the patients, it's the entire community around the patient that also needs to be pulled through so that we understand that kind of 360-degree view. So making sure that we're really clear on those profiles of, when we think about the epidemiology, when we think about incidence and prevalence, who is going to be most likely, afflicted with the disease that we're studying? And let's make sure, similar to when we're thinking about our diversity action plan work, let's make sure that we're being as representative as possible in that patient, care partner, and site perspective too, because we want to make sure that we're understanding for the sites, a very experienced site, or maybe a newer site, a site that's newer to research and what's difficult for them. When we're thinking about, the patients, we know that they're not a monolith, right? So we need to make sure that we're understanding patients who have different relationships with the healthcare system, different access to different healthcare systems. So making sure that we're thinking from a geography perspective, race and ethnicity perspective, gender perspective is really, critically important. So I think just making sure that you're being thoughtful about that when you're going to do this work is critically important. But then also, I think moderation, and sometimes, it's great to be as strategic as possible, but also when you think about the true actual implementation of, these panels or even these walkthroughs of the protocol, you want to make sure that you are moderating, you are pulling in all of the different perspectives of the voices in the room so that there isn't that one person who's really excited, but maybe monopolizing the conversation, right? You want to make sure you're hearing from everyone equally. And I think even making sure that you're debriefing, right? So that, when you're having these conversations, when you're doing, whether it's a simulation of a visit or a diagnostic or anything that you're looking to potentially do within the study, that you're taking the time to debrief. So that those who may not have input as actively in that conversation still has an opportunity and a chance to really speak up, because it's going to be, again, that quiet voice might be the voice that's driving the most innovation for your protocol or for your program. So you want to make sure that you're hearing from everyone.
Great to hear, and we had some questions from the audience even about specific subpopulations. What about the needs of the Asian American community? What about the needs of patient voice from developing countries or in Latin America? And so it must be very challenging, Meg, for folks in the study teams to be able to ensure and have confidence in representation, whether it's around axes of race and ethnicity, age, orientation, and doing that across the wealth of geographies that a company like Genentech is seeking to run development programs.
Yeah, a great question from the audience. So I'll give you an example of a team who's doing this very well, and they're working in COPD. So they have an ambassador in every country who's responsible for defining what representation means. So is that folks who are in poverty and can't reach the door of the doctor's office, much less the clinical trial center? Is it our immigration in a certain country and the immigrants who are not being reached? So that's one way to try to ensure you're developing a diversity action plan, not just for the US, which I know all eyes are on US with the FDA. And thankfully, coming through with the mandate, I think that's really helping us be better at reaching representative patient populations, but looking at every country. And what does that mean for them? Is there gender representation in certain countries? Sometimes it's not women. A lot of times it is, but sometimes it's men in certain countries. So that's one way. I do want to be careful here. I absolutely agree. You can't change everything based on one patient voice. But for folks who haven't integrated a patient voice into their process yet, one patient voice can change things dramatically. So and I highly believe in ensuring representation, right? We need to hear from folks who we haven't heard from. One of our patient advocacy function has over 400 patient advocacy groups, but they've formed a council with underserved voices. And these are patients who represent homeless patients, represent LGBTQ, represent transgender community, rare disease, and they have always had councils, but this is probably speaking to folks who are the furthest from getting to that doctor's door. And it's not just clinical trials, right? It's medication access, it's diagnostics, it's the whole health equity picture. So I know I went off there a little bit, Craig, but there's just so much to this. But for people who are like, it's a small company, it's a biotech, I can't form a patient council, we have not enough time in the day. Even one patient voice, and I applaud getting Black or Latino or Native American Indigenous voices can help you deburden protocols and make this easier for patients.
Shauna, Meg was mentioning making sure that we're thinking beyond pharma, right? So maybe you're at a biotech or a small company. And many in our audience today are probably also representative of research sites, some study coordinators or investigators. Some may be from CROs or tech partners or recruitment vendors. When you're thinking about patient voice for your programs, what's the role for those other stakeholders and organizations? Do you expect them to go out and listen to patients as well? Are you finding ways to share the insights that you're gathering to help empower some of those stakeholders? How do their lives change as a result of some of these patient insights?
Yeah, so as you know, many of us in pharma do partner with CROs quite heavily for the operational, execution of many of our trials. And so, as a part of our debrief when it comes to our pressure tests, these are insights that are shared. But I will say that, the loudest voice in the room is always going to be a challenge, because that individual, they may be very knowledgeable, and they also may be someone who has a lot of experience when it comes to panels. Like, often, you remember, we're recruiting individuals, asking patient advocacy groups to give us suggestions for people who would be interested in doing this. And often these are people who are, very outgoing and are happy to talk to others. And there are people for whom their personality doesn't lend to that, or perhaps they don't even have, they're not even aware these advocacy groups are available to them or are part of that. And so I will say that there are many ways and many places, I agree, to get these insights. So that includes, people who go to some of these smaller, like, advocacy conferences, or like to meetings, for example. And they may not be me, but it will perhaps be somebody on the medical affairs team who will go. And we have meetings, which includes medical affairs, clinical development, and they tell us the insights coming back not only from the KOL, but also from some of these groups as well. There are opportunities to go to, depending on the disease, and I am in rare, so there aren't often really big congresses designed to it like you have in the oncology space. But there are smaller conferences, and some that are more geared to patients, so that they are coming and that they can understand some of the science and things that are happening. And if you go to those congresses, I've sat at booths and I've had the opportunity to talk with patients as they come by, and to try to clarify some of the discrepancies that they may have, because which is wonderful, I will say, but it's also very confusing that there is so much happening right now in the research and in development. All of these new platforms and all of these new technologies that are being brought to bear are bringing amazing opportunities for new drugs. But that also leads to a lot of confusion and a lot of misunderstandings about what that drug can do and what the side effects are. And so for many of us, it's really, really important for us to sit at these booths and to just be there to answer questions that may come up about our pipeline, questions that patients may have. And oftentimes they're like, wow, I never even knew about that. My physician didn't say anything. And I was like, well, some PIs are just not involved in research. There may be a personal preference. It just may be that they're not at centers that are geared towards that. And you let them know, well, there are like clinicaltrials.gov. There are many places that you can go to find out what's happening. And many patients don't know that. So just basic things like that. And I think we have groups that are, geared towards really trying to make sure that we are educating patients about all of their options. And in the reverse, once they know about that, we can start to get their input coming in from places like forums and things like that may not have direct access to industry in the ways that other groups might.
Meg, we were just with Shauna chatting about some of these different stakeholder groups as well in that intersection. And I think you had mentioned earlier a site council. So I'm curious, just as we're unpacking a little bit of the role of our extended network, CROs, tech partners, recruitment vendors. What were you hinting at with a site council here?
Site alliance, yeah. No, and Shauna, just can I double down on the education for patients? And this is where our site alliance helps us as well. Biggest fears of trials has still not been calmed. That fear of being treated like a guinea pig, of getting placebo. We really have to do a better job. We have to everybody in the room has to take accountability to teach their friends and family, to create educational materials so folks understand, to Shauna's point, what their options are, but also can lean into questions with their physicians. So that's some of the things that the AIR Site Alliance is teaching us, Craig. So in the Advancing Inclusive Research Site Alliance, what we do is co-create education or co-create more inclusive practices. And And I think we've got a publication out with a more inclusive entry criteria, and they push us. So that partner, that site voice, and really listening. So I do hear that we can be inclusive and include representative voices in steering committees, but that still doesn't change what the protocol authors do. That's a real problem. And it's due to concern about safety, or this is the way it's always been done. Our sites help push that. They're part of our community. We give them a forum with our leaderships to tell them exactly what's changing. And there's pressure for us to incorporate and push those boundaries, from pressure testing your lab normals like hemoglobin A1C with data to really understand what is your risk to elevate that hemoglobin A1C. So yeah, the sites are critical. I mean, they're seeing their patients every single day. They know their burdens. You know, I hear stories about, you know, a patient who can't afford either gas or food to come to the clinical trial visit. And so they pay for gas and they don't have food, which means all of us should make sure we have reimbursement for food for our patients, even if it's an hour. We can do that. I think 10 years ago, Craig, we were all worried about slap on the wrist for incentivizing patients. And what we're hearing is that the patients who can't afford to come to the door can't come to the door. So we need to be properly reimbursing for time, reasonable based on the time and burden of the trial, and offering childcare reimbursement, elder care reimbursement, if those are incurred because the patient was at our site being seen. So we have to do more, and people are still scared. Teams are scared, like, I don't want an IRB delay, I don't want to do the wrong thing. And I'm like, yeah, it's not the wrong thing to properly support your patient. We need to do more. So I think our sites are helping us push on that, giving us real stories that we can help people nudge them and persuade them to do more. And it's not like they don't want to do the right thing. It's just different from what they did 10 years ago. So I think that's the perspective they offer us and help us co-create that kind of education. And we have some of those animated videos. We give them away for free. If the site wants them, we take our logo off of them. So that kind of deepened partnership where they can hold our feet to the fire. Patient advocacy groups do this too, right? They'll come to us and say, what are you doing about representation triple negative breast cancer? And we'll go, what are we doing? We need to do more. Let's figure out what we can do. I mean, they have patient advocacy groups have been amazing at making sure we get better at helping our patients. So that's the other group I would probably lean in on.
Well, I appreciate that. As I didn't fully introduce myself at the outset, but I'm on the board for the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, where I'm also a patient myself, and so certainly appreciate your calling out the role for our advocacy partners in this journey. Sasha, Meg had mentioned there some insights related to patient reimbursement and compensation around participation. And we've seen a few questions in our chat with our audience here come up around this topic as well. Sasha, I'm wondering, based on insights you're seeing, are there new trends emerging or new strategies for sponsors as it relates to patient reimbursement or patient compensation? Certainly, we see some interesting policy shifts happening in the U.S. around tax code. What are some of the signals you're seeing and changes that you're hoping for?
Yeah, no, I think that's such an important piece of the puzzle, an important question, Craig. So just before getting into that, there's something that, you know, Meg, you mentioned in your answer that I want to circle back to around education. And so I think, again, another, you know, underscoring that, I do think an area where we can all lean in from a partnership perspective is obviously supporting with patient education and following some of those current concerns around clinical research. But I think that we could also do a better job of educating each other within industry, because I think that some of those myths around what you can and can't do, and this then kind of lends itself to your question, Craig, what you can and can't do around patient reimbursement still exist. And oftentimes, many of us might find ourselves in the position of having to really make sure that we're also educating our respective organizations and companies around what can and cannot happen when it comes to just alleviating patient burden, right? Because again, that those thoughts about potentially being coercive or inducing patients by simply paying for their meal or paying for their gas or things around those on those lines still exist in terms of, concern. So I think that as we're all obviously, having these conversations internally and talking to the IRBs, we can, I think, do a better job of really just making sure that that baseline is clear and established on what are the do's and don'ts, right? When you think about where we are today. I think for us at Abby, we're really thinking, we're trying to push the envelope there, right? And really kind of think about financial toxicity for patients just to participate in clinical trials, and particularly in the oncology space where we know that financial toxicity is very high. Really looking at, how does clinical trial participation and even some of the reimbursements, when you think about, again, some of those laws really might push a patient into a different tax bracket, and then all of a sudden they're not getting the same level of support that they otherwise would. So I think making sure that when we're hearing things from patients and we're also doing our part to make sure that we're supporting from a reimbursement standpoint, that we're signaling that back to even our government affairs organizations, that we're really making sure that lawmakers understand implications of laws, whether it's federal or whether it's at the state level, to make sure that, again, we're not inadvertently just in the entire environment creating a level of difficulty for patients to participate in much needed research, especially in spaces like oncology or like rare disease, Shauna, that you're working in, where it's critically important. It's always important for patients to participate in research, but it's critically important and oftentimes a life or death decision for patients to really participate in these clinical research programs and get access to this cutting edge treatment. So I think making sure that ecosystem, I think is my word of the day here, but the entire kind of ecosystem within industry, but also surrounding industry that truly impacts the day-to-day lives of patients. It's important to make sure that we're all educating each other on what these implications are, because we might be getting little nuggets here and there, right, from patients or from each other, and not really seeing the full picture.
Thanks so much, Sasha. Yeah, this is certainly a great space to watch. I appreciate that there were a number of questions on this topic. You know what? A quick time check. I only have another 18 minutes with you. So where I'd like to take our conversation next is around a theme that we've touched on a bit, but it's around trust, and it's around both our ability to restore trust as well as sustain and maintain trust. Um, and Shauna, I wonder if you can maybe get us started, because I know you've been engaging with patients in the blood disorder community, it sounds like. What are some of the strategies or tactics you've been trying to tap into, whether it's around rebuilding trust where there are breaks and gaps, or around maintaining and sustaining trust so that we're not just showing up and being takers?
So I'm in the hemophilia space, and as many of you know, in the 80s, there was a severe break in trust between the medical and the pharmaceutical community and the hemophilia community, in that they were receiving tainted blood products. We were unaware of that time that HIV/AIDS virus was being transmitted in the blood, or that hepatitis C was being transmitted, and many of these already vulnerable patients who were dependent on blood products in order to live a semi-normal life became infected with HIV. And so from that perspective, there was a severe break in trust. I will say that that community rallied and they became a powerful force. They were the ones who demanded change, and they demanded accountability. And in the years that followed, they presented themselves as clinical trial participants, because they wanted change, and they wanted the next breakthrough to be because they had actively participated and advocated for that change. And so I will say that one thing that has to happen is accountability. In hemophilia, there was accountability, but I think that there is that break of trust exists in our Native American communities, in our African American communities, in our Latina American communities, in our transgender communities. We have not been the kindest to LGBTQ community at all. And so I will say that the medical community in general, we need to be accountable for our actions. We need to acknowledge the abuses of the past, and we need to provide a framework so that these abuses do not happen again. Patients were treated as guinea pigs. They were taken advantage of. They were told they were given treatment and they were not. And so we have to be accountable to that, but we cannot let that hold us back. We have to move forward. And so I think accountability is important. And the next step really is to make sure that we lay out what we are going to do, and that this is our promise, that we are not going to deviate from this course, and that there are going to be repercussions. And we know that there are, many of us are aware that there are many strong litigations, and things in place now that would not allow these things to happen. But our patient community may not be aware of that. So to let them know that there are safeguards in place to ensure that doesn't happen again, and build that trust, one advocacy group, one patient, one PI at a time, to make sure that they know that they are being heard, that their voices matter, and that we will be taking their input and their needs into consideration. So I think that has to happen. And I think that, part of that is also, in pharma, we need a certain level of rigor for our research in order to be considered appropriate for approval with various regulatory agencies. And that often comes with very large institutions. It very often comes with, people who've been doing research for years. And that comes in very rich communities where they can support that. And that is not often where our patients who really need the help, and who probably can, as you say, provide that breakthrough in that voice that we need. And so I think that we also need to try to better partner with our community hospitals, and to try to bring in these populations that have been underserved, who have the smallest incorporation into our clinical trials, many times because they don't want to be. I'm coming from a Caribbean community. I'll tell you right now that very, very many of my family members will tell you they are not going to be guinea pigs. When it came to COVID, they waited. They were not willing to take that vaccine first. They wanted to see what happened to everybody else. So that's something we have to try to overcome, and we have to lead by example. I took the vaccine and I said, hey, look, I'm fine. I want to remain fine. I want you to remain fine. And so you have to kind of lead by examples in your own community, but you also have to reach out and try to incorporate these people in, acknowledge our mistakes, and try to show that we are not going to do that again.
It was a privilege for me during the planning for the Precision Medicine Initiative to spend time with the descendants of Henrietta Lacks and her family, and it was a sign of hope for me to see how, because that family has been engaged, and how active they are in being participants in improving healthcare today. Because they were engaged, they're not running from and putting up walls around research or healthcare, but the first generation down from Henrietta Lacks was actively partnered with the NIH to help them to do better. And the second generation down from Henrietta Lacks has descendants who are entering the nursing profession, right? And so it's exciting for me to see how the generational change can happen when we're including people and hearing their voice and letting them see the change that they can make when their voice is brought in. And Sasha, I know you've been spending time thinking, I'm sure like everybody, around this topic of trust, but also how do we maintain and sustain trust in these communities going forward so that we're not just showing up with a need and then leaving. Do you have some reflections there around helping to give those communities something back as a signal of trust?
Absolutely. And I will say, I'm gonna shout out to Sheila in the chat because I see what you put through in terms of early engagement, transparency, and communication are key elements of building trust. And I completely concur with that, right? I think that when it comes to, now we're gonna talk about sustaining trust, but when it comes to building trust, I think, it's almost the same as sustaining that trust in terms of being transparent, and driving communication, to your point, Craig, not just when you need it, not just when you're trying to design your trial, but also, throughout the development process and just throughout, our engagement as, industry within these spaces where we're developing treatments for patients. So I think that comes with, having, bi-directional relationships with those patient organizations, not just when we need them, but also understanding what they need from us. We obviously come and represent large organizations and companies that have resources. How can we leverage those resources to also support and sustain those organizations that support patients? How can we be transparent and communicative about the ways that we're collaborating with patients, the outcomes of those collaborations, and how it's driving change within our processes? And then also for the participants in our trials, how do we make sure that as they're, cycling off of the trial, that we're providing something back? Can we provide some results back to them? Can we be thoughtful about how we reintroduce them into the standard of care process, right? Because at the end of the day, this is a part of their treatment journey. And so making sure that we're transparent about, and at Abby, we're thinking about that as well, but being transparent about how we're thinking about that as well. I think that when it comes to just clinical research as a whole, again, supporting when it comes to education, being transparent about the benefits as well as the risks, right? And being transparent about really what we're looking to do and accomplish with patients together and bringing novel treatments to those spaces. So I think it's critically important to just be upfront, to be clear, to be transparent, to communicate, and to look at ways that we can, again, support organizations that then support patients really materially, and really make sure that we're, again, it's truly bi-directional. I think that also, and I'm going to circle back to another point, Shauna, that you raised when you talked about trust, which is, trust can also happen with one PAG or one PI at a time. I think that's also critically important because we also have to see ourselves as a part of a larger community within healthcare, right? And so oftentimes the trust may not just be about clinical trials and the clinical research process, but it's about the healthcare community at large. And oftentimes patients might go to the doctor with symptoms and they're not believed, or they're given a tougher time to try to make their case around needing, interventional treatment or care. I think that we need to also make sure that we're working with our PIs or with the treating community at large to really talk through and be transparent and honest about some of these misgivings that happen still today. Oftentimes when women are not believed, people of color are not believed when they talk about pain or when they talk about symptoms that they're having. And that can be just as damaging when now it comes time for a patient to really do something interventional, like participate in a clinical trial. The experience that they might be having with their doctor can inform how they see, again, the entire healthcare system at large. So, I think it's also around making sure that we're showing up as industry in the way that we should to be driving, again, those bi-directional relationships with patient organizations, but it's also around making sure that we're holding, our site partners accountable, that we're holding the treating community accountable for, the treatment of patients and sharing some of, the knowledge that we're hearing from them to really support, I think, breaking down those barriers that can also occur when it comes to patients, again, just interacting with the healthcare system at large.
Thanks so much, Sasha. I appreciate that. We have only about 5 minutes left, and I have in my parking lot about treating insights as data. We hinted on topics around AI and real world data, and there's been some interesting questions in the chat about how immersively can patients truly co-create protocols, co-author protocols. And so in our last few minutes, I'd love to go around and give you just a minute and a half each to just share some reflection on what this field will look like over the next 3 years. What is going to be some of the big changes that we should be looking towards? Meg, can you kick us off here?
Yeah, sure. And I'll just start and I'll do it quickly on what we're doing today. So you get a sense that it's going to be really big in 10 years. So lab in the loop. So we're using AI to look at scans to better understand disease. We're looking at lab biosamples to better understand targets that we can target disease. So preclinically, it's called lab in the loop. We've already identified at least 2 agents that are going into preclinical and science. So we hope it's very important we get representation of those biosamples. So please, everybody, think about a registry. I have joined a registry. Everybody, we need more heterogeneity in our registries. The second is during a trial. So we are using AI to leverage the data from that trial and predict who is going to progress or get better on the study drug versus the comparator. We can do that mid-trial. Now, this is fairly new, but that's a game changer. If we can do this well and predict who the people that will be effective for the drug, they'll be able to change study design, and we'll be able to do things faster, and we'll be able to bring in patients that are appropriate for the trial versus maybe all patients, even though I know we're moving more toward personalized healthcare. And then the patient. So, with generative AI, it's amazing, right? You can plug in anything and you can get something. Something good might be ideas for your vacation in Paris, but something bad might be, tell me more about this drug, because we know it pulls from the internet, and there's a lot of misinformation on the internet. So I think it's a double-edged coin. I think we're going to be really mindful about the use of AI when it comes to our health, because now you Google things and there are things that are incorrect in there. So I think pharmaceuticals and biotech and educators are going to have to do a really good job of making sure there's good information out there and up the ante on education. 10 years from now, my hope is we'll be doing more decentralized trial methods. We'll be doing more remote monitoring. We'll be able to ease the burden in our trials, because we've certainly seen that increase over the last 15, 20 years. And our patients will have better methods to tell us how their disease is doing. That will change how we measure endpoints. Probably that's at least 3 things, but I have a lot of hope for where we're going. I think it's incredibly interesting. It is changing jobs in our industry and changing how we look at the work. And I think we all would be good. Maybe a call out to everybody is, if we can get our data all in the same place so we can query it, we'll be a lot stronger together.
Thanks, Meg.
Leave with that.
And Sasha, just a minute and a half, just a minute. A quick highlight on what you're most excited about for progress and change in this field over the next 3 years.
Yeah, I know. I echo everything that Meg said. So just got excited hearing you speak about all of those great and important things, Meg. And so, one of the things that I'm excited by with the future is, obviously, as you're bringing in these diverse perspectives to inform how we're designing our trials, which then will in turn inform the fact that our trials will be more representative. I'm excited by the fact that we're going to have a better understanding of the outcomes for our treatments, right? And I think that you signaled this a little bit in your answer, like that, we'll have that better understanding of just, again, outcomes. And then also, what are the true gaps in treatment? And making sure that that's informing our pipeline, and really making sure that we're doing that with, again, that diverse lens. Because right now, I don't think that our data sets have been representative enough to truly understand where that unmet need really is, especially when you think about underserved populations. I'm excited by the idea of pipeline being informed by that, to understand when you start to think about underserved populations, what are the needs? Where are their treatment gaps, and how are we going to make sure that we're designing and developing, treatments for patients that are left behind. So I'm really excited to see this full cycle loop, right? We're being more inclusive. We're going to have more inclusive data, and that's going to inform a more inclusive pipeline.
Shauna, we just have 1 minute here. If you can just share some final thoughts on what you're hoping for progress in this field.
Yeah, so I echo what I've heard from Meg and Sasha, so I won't repeat it, but I will say that, being able to have that diverse voice in a trial, and we'll be able to allow for patients to truly be partners as we develop these protocols, so that we will hopefully, and the incorporation of new technologies such as AI, so that we can perhaps minimize the patient burden, reduce the length of these trials, and increase the rapidity with which we are able to bring new drugs to market.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Shauna, Sasha, Meg. What a tremendous conversation. I encourage folks in the audience, follow these voices on LinkedIn or other places so you can keep hearing and learning and sharing and interacting with them all. I'd like to thank the folks at Reuters for bringing this group together, and all of you in the audience for joining and participating in the conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Take care.